My name's Tom Lowe. Hopefully you guys are all either SpaceX alumni or SpaceX employees. I'm going to start with a story, okay? I want to take you back to the late 90s, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my cube. I could hear people around me high-fiving each other and the sound of champagne corks popping. And we had done what every company wanted to do here in Silicon Valley. We just had our IPO. This is the late 90s. Everybody was happy. And then as the stock kept going up and up over the next months, people got even happier. And then for those of you who know history, you know what happened. I was at .com. The .com bubble burst. The company I was at actually ended up shutting down, and I held all of my stock until it went to zero. But I learned a couple important things came out of that. One is I realized I need to educate myself about how my equity worked, because I didn't really. So I started to do that. And when I did that, it started me down the path of making a career change into financial planning, which is something I did about a decade ago after spending about 20 years in tech. And then I built this firm specifically because I wanted people just like you who work in tech, who've worked hard for their equity, to make sure they get the most out of it and they don't end up where I ended up, which was owning nothing. Okay, so that's why we're here today. Let's get going. I'm going to share some slides with you. Okay, SpaceX alumni and employees, here are the 3 steps you must take before your IPO. So you know how I was feeling a while ago. So this is for educational purposes. You should always talk to your own professional. So here's the agenda. Told you a bit about my background. I'll give you just a little bit more, and then I'm going to walk you through the steps you guys need to take before your IPO. So step 1 is determine if you should sell your SpaceX equity once your IPO happens. Step 2 is decide how much of it should you sell. Step 3 is how do you minimize taxes on that equity. And then the next steps are at the end, we'll have some live Q&A. So expect the content will take about 25 minutes or so. We'll have a few minutes left for any live Q&A. If you guys have questions as we go through, feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and then I will respond to those at the end. Okay. And then I've done a number of these webinars, and some people are perfectly happy to ask their questions during the live Q&A. Others prefer a more private setting. So if that's the case, you want to talk about your own specific situation, then I will give people the chance to do that. So if you look now, you should see a red Schedule Now button. If you click on that button, it's going to take you to my calendar. You just put time on my calendar, and we can have a virtual session about your SpaceX IPO strategy session. And you may have specific questions about your situation. So feel free to just click on that and put time in my calendar. All right, let's get going here. So background, as I said, I worked in tech about 20 years, been doing this more than a decade, and I specialize. I only work with tech people with equity, like SpaceX employees. And you guys are why I built the firm, as I said. Okay, so let's walk through these steps. Step 1 is determine if you should sell your SpaceX equity after your IPO. So this, to me, is the first because it's the most important step to understand what's at risk. So I talk with clients all the time about this concept of concentrated stock. And that means owning too much of a single company stock. And my guideline is if it's more than 20% of your investable assets, then you are highly concentrated. And that's because you ought to think about diversifying, because there's a ton more risk, ton more volatility when you have it in a single company stock versus a diversified portfolio. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Well, here's the real risk. This is a stock chart showing you the stock for Silicon Valley Bank. So what you see, stock went up and up and up, got up to 600 plus, and then within a matter of a very short time, bank shut down. Okay. So if you have too much of your net worth in a single company stock, something bad like this happens out of your control, a lot of your net worth could go away. So I have a planner, as someone who worked at Silicon Valley Bank, had about $7 million in Silicon Valley Bank stock, all for his retirement, went away to nothing. So again, you guys may be in a similar situation. You have all your equity here, highly concentrated in SpaceX. Something happens beyond your control, you could lose a lot of your net worth. So that's the real risk behind being too concentrated. So how do you figure out if you have too much? And if you have too much, why you should think about selling? We're going to walk through steps. I'll give you a quick overview and then walk you through an example. So step one is just calculate the total value of your vested SpaceX equity. Okay, multiply your SpaceX share, vested SpaceX shares by, you can do it by the current expected IPO price. Okay. Step two is calculate total value of investable assets. So that's everything else, your savings, investments, retirement, 401k. You add all that up. You add it to your total value of SpaceX equity. Then that's your investable assets. And then step three, simple, divide your total value of SpaceX equity by total value of the assets. You get a percentage of concentration. In step four, if your concentration is more than 20%, you're highly concentrated, you ought to think about diversifying. Okay. Now, a quick example, specific example. Let's say you get 1,000 shares vested. It's $600 a share, 600,000 of total value of your SpaceX equity. Let's say you add up your other things, it's about 400,000. You add it up, you got 1 million total investable assets. Then your 600,000 SpaceX equity divided by 1 million, 60% concentration. 60% is more than the 20% threshold. You're highly concentrated. Now, the reason I'm starting with this is because if you're 90% concentrated, then you want to figure this out. If you're 10% concentrated, you want to figure it out, but it just doesn't matter as much as in the case if it's 90%. Okay, because 90% is almost all your net worth. So you want to make sure you figure this out. Okay, so that is the first step. If you're highly concentrated, you really ought to think about selling. Okay. So step two is decide how much of your SpaceX equity you should sell once the IPO happens. So first question people have here is, all right, when can I actually sell my equity? Okay. So based on the publicly available info I have as of today, here's what I think is most likely. Now that final S1 SEC filing is going to have the final terms. That's going to come out in the next couple of weeks. Once that comes out, you'll know precisely the answer to these. Okay. So first thing to be aware of in terms of timing is you have what's typically have a lockup period. Okay. And that is employees can't sell or alumni can't sell during that time because they want to make sure that there's not a lot of sales, pushes the price down. And it's typically 90 to 180 days after the IPO date. So that's, given what we know today, that is the most likely lockup period. Now, it's also possible that this will be a traditional IPO with an early release. Okay. And what that means is you can sell a certain percentage of your shares during this lockup period, as long as certain business targets are met. And then you can sell the rest of the shares after the lockup period is done. So, for example, employees could sell up to 15% of vested holdings before the lockup period if certain business targets are met. For example, stock is more than 150% of the IPO price for 5 consecutive days. Okay. Again, the details will be in this final S1. We don't know today, but I think it's possible you'll have traditional IPO with an early release. But we'll find out when the final S1 comes out. Okay. So that lets you understand you're going to either be able to sell it when the lockup period ends, 90, 180 days, or maybe you're going to be able to sell some percentage before that. So how should you decide how much to sell? So first, if you're highly concentrated, you should think about it. So the way I would think about it is in terms of steps. The first step is I would sell immediately to cover any valid near-term cash needs. And when I say valid near-term cash needs, that's things like, are you going to have to pay taxes on this equity? Okay. If you know you're going to have to pay taxes, you need to get that cash out so you can pay those taxes. Okay. So that's an example. Another is, let's say you want to buy a house. So you're going to buy a house. You're here in the Bay Area or Southern California. You're going to buy a $2 million house. You want to put 20% down. You need $400,000 in cash. I would sell, get the cash so that you have it, so that when you're ready to buy the house, you have the cash. It's not in stocks in case the stock drops a lot. You got to sell more stock to get your down payment. So the next step would be decide if you want to keep a certain percentage in your SpaceX equity. Okay. Most of my clients believe in their companies. That's why they're working there, or that's why they work there. And so they say, hey, I want to keep some stake in the company. So for my clients, I say, hey, probably 5 to 10% of your investable assets is the right amount. But you need to figure out what you're comfortable with. It could be more than that, 10, 20, 30, whatever you're comfortable with. But you want to figure that out. Okay. You carve out that percentage. And then you're left with the remaining shares. Okay. And then you can do, I have 3 versions you can think about, 3 ways to approach this. One is you could just sell immediately up to whatever the max is. So if it's 15% with an early release, go and sell 15%. Once the lockup period ends, sell everything. Most of my clients aren't comfortable with that. So the other 2 versions are you sell over time on a schedule. So what you do is you say, all right, I'm going to sell 10% a quarter over the next 10 quarters. Okay. Once it's gone public, once the IPO happens. And the benefit is it gets you a very, it puts it on autopilot so that you guys will, and you've already probably experienced this, as the stock goes up and down, there's gonna be a ton of emotion. And anytime you're able to sell, you'll say, hey, maybe it'll go up more, so I shouldn't sell now, or maybe it's gonna go down. I don't know. So there's a lot of that churn that happens, emotional churn. This puts it on autopilot so that you don't have to think about it. You just say quarters here, windows open, I'm going to sell 10%. Okay. The other thing is you're able to spread your taxes in over multiple years. That's going to reduce your taxes, And then the other, so that's sell over time on a schedule. Sell over time on a schedule of other flavor is more when the price is higher, less when it's lower. Okay, so you can set price bands for the stock, and you can say, okay, for example, let's say it's between 600 to 700. I'm going to sell 25% of my remaining shares. But if it's less than 600, I'm only going to sell 15%. If it's more than 700, I'm going to sell 50%. Okay, you can figure out what bands you want. You can figure out what percent. Same idea. It's on autopilot. So quarter opens, window opens. You say, okay, the price is here. I'm going to sell 25%. And again, you can spread your tax over multiple years. Okay, so those are 3 ways of thinking about how to sell your equity once the IPO happens. And again, like I said before, if you have questions about your own situation, feel free to click on the schedule now button. Okay, step 3 is how are you going to minimize your taxes on your equity after the IPO? So, right, we understand your concentration. You're highly concentrated. You got to think about diversifying. We understand how much you want to sell, and then now we're going to talk about how do you minimize taxes? So the first step is the first thing you need to understand is what type of equity do you have? Do you have restricted stock units, RSUs, incentive stock options, ISOs, non-qualified stock options, NSOs? And the reason why is because you have different tax treatment for each type of equity, and there's a different way to minimize taxes for that type of equity. So we're going to go through each of these. So we'll start with RSUs. Okay, so the SpaceX RSUs are what are called single trigger. Okay, what that means, you're getting paid, you're getting compensation in the form of SpaceX shares, and it's vesting based on the single trigger of your time working at SpaceX. So for a lot of employees, it's semi-annual vesting over 4 or 5 years. So every 6 months you vest, and the total grant you get over 4 or 5 years. And the tax treatment is straightforward. You're going to pay ordinary income tax rate on the fair market value of the stock when it's vested. Okay. So once the IPO happens, you vest whatever the price is on that day. You're going to pay ordinary income tax, meaning just like your salary. Now, some of you are probably aware of this. You may owe taxes on shares that you've vested already, but again, you can't sell those until after IPO. So that means you may owe a lot of taxes. You can't sell. So that's something you should be aware of. If you are going to owe a lot of taxes, you want to make sure you have a way to pay for those. Okay, and the way to minimize taxes for RSUs is you can hold those RSUs for more than 1 year after you vest, and then they qualify for any future gains would qualify for the lower long-term capital gains tax rate. Okay, so the highest ordinary income tax rate is 37%. The highest long-term cap gains tax rate is 20%. So that's potentially 17% savings on that gain. So let me give you an example. Let's say you vest at $500 a share. You hold it more than a year, you sell it at $600 a share, then you're going to pay that lower long-term cap gains on that $100 gain, okay? Not on the whole $600, because when you vest the $500, you owe the taxes for ordinary income, but on the gain, okay? All right, so now ISOs or incentive stock options are, and this tends to be, it's the right to buy the stock, but you're not obligated to. It has a tax benefit. And this was typically early employees at SpaceX, more likely you have ISOs. Okay. Vesting schedule, what I've seen typically is vest over 4 years, 1 year cliff, and then it's monthly or quarterly after that. So here's the key difference for ISOs, the tax treatment. You owe $0 in taxes when you're granted the ISOs, when you vest them, and when you exercise them. Okay, that's different. Remember, when you vest your RSUs, you owe ordinary income tax right away. Now, you can pay this lower long-term cap gains rate if you sell more than 2 years after your grant and more than a year after you exercise. So again, it's 17% savings potentially, difference between the ordinary income and long-term cap. Now, an important thing to know is you may have to pay what's called alternative minimum tax, or AMT. This is just parallel tax calculations. So anytime every year you do your taxes, gets calculated the regular way, and then there's a parallel calculation, AMT calculation. If your ordinary is higher, that's what you pay. You probably aren't even aware of AMT. If your AMT is higher, you're going to have to pay AMT. And the reason this matters when you exercise ISOs is because when you exercise ISOs, the difference between the exercise price and the fair market value counts as AMT income. Doesn't count as ordinary income. So for example, let's say your exercise was $100. fair market value is 500. That $400 difference counts as AMT income. So in a year where you exercise lots of ISOs, you're going to have a lot of AMT income. You probably owe AMT in that year. So how do you minimize taxes? So the key way is that I do with clients is you exercise and you hold for this long-term capital gains, right? So you want to exercise, hold for more than a year, and all of these assume that SpaceX has IPO'd. Then you can sell those shares for that lower tax rate. And then the other strategy we use is, if you can, you want to exercise early in the year. And that's because you're going to minimize your taxes, but you also minimize how much risk you take in exercising and hold those. Because the way AMT works is, if you exercise and then you hold into the next calendar year, then you have to pay AMT. So the way we do this, let's say January 2nd, you exercise and the price is at $600 a share, okay? And then you get to December of the same year and the price is $600 higher, then you say, fine, I'm going to hold it. And then January 3rd of the next year, you can sell, and you've only had to hold it for 3 days into that new year. Sell, get your long-term cap gains, you pay your AMT. But let's say it was 600 when you exercised in January. You get to December, stock has dropped to $100 a share. What that means, if you go into the next year, is you're going to have to pay a ton of AMT on value that's not there anymore. So what you could do is you could sell, then you owe no AMT. Sell in December, you owe no AMT, and that's the benefit. Okay. And then another strategy we use is what's called AMT crossover, which is you could calculate each year how much how many ISOs can you exercise just before you have to pay AMT. Exercise just that much, and then hold those. And so you're going to do some portion each year, pay no AMT, but have stock qualify for that long-term cap gains. And again, this is going to depend, your specific strategy is going to depend on your specific goals, timing, taxes, etc. So you just talk to a financial or tax professional about this. Okay, for NSOs, non-qualified stock options, you have the right to buy the stock, but you aren't obligated. These are different from ISOs and RSUs. So you don't owe any taxes when it's granted or vested, but when you exercise, you have to pay ordinary income tax on that spread between the strike or exercise price, fair market value. So say $100 strike price, $600 fair market value, that $500 counts as ordinary income. You're going to pay like your salary. So the way to think about NSOs is there are two sources of value. One is the intrinsic value. That's the difference between the strike price and the fair market value we just talked about. And then there's time value, because most NSOs expire after 7 to 10 years. So if someone said to you, so time value, the way to think about it is, somebody said to you, you can have this option, and it can either, you have this option that expires tomorrow, or this one expires 10 years from now. Which one would you take? You take the one that is 10 years from now, because you have 10 years for the stock to go up for that to have value, whereas the one for tomorrow is going to expire tomorrow. So that's the time value. So in general, if you don't have some valid reason to exercise early, like valid reason being you need the cash, then you want to exercise close to the expiration date. So again, like 1 to 2 years typically from the expiration date. If it's 10 years, then you get the most value out of that time value. But you want to talk to your professional. And again, if you need help, put time on my calendar. Okay. And then this last piece, I'm going to just high level. There's 4 tax strategies to help you diversify your equity without triggering a big tax bill. Okay. Because no matter what type of equity you have in SpaceX, it likely have lots of cap gains. Okay. So the first 2 depend on what's called tax loss harvesting. So The IRS, if you have investment losses, that you can use those to set off to offset gains, and you don't pay taxes. So tax loss harvesting is a strategy to take losses to offset gains, so you save on taxes. So first strategy is direct indexing. That's where you match an index, like the S&P 500, but instead of buying a fund or ETF, you buy individual stocks. So you buy a couple of hundred stocks that will track that index. And then even if S&P goes up, there are always some stocks within that index that go down. So when that happens, you simply take those losses, you capture the losses, and then you build up those losses, and then you take those losses and use them to offset gains in your SpaceX equity. So you sell enough, use up the losses, don't pay taxes on that, on those gains. Okay. Long short direct indexing is a souped up version of direct indexing. You add what's called a long short extension. Okay. So when you go long, that is you buy stocks, they go up, you make money. When you go short, you're betting when stocks go down, you make money. Okay. So you add this long short on. What that means is you have more chances to do tax loss harvesting because when the markets go down, you get losses just like you would in direct indexing. But when the stock goes up, because you're shorting, you also can take losses. So it just gives you the ability to do direct indexing, generate more losses faster. Okay. Exchange fund, you take your shares, SpaceX, you put them into this fund, and other individuals with lots of their company stock put theirs in. So if you're at Procter & Gamble, you put it in. And so you get a share in that fund, which is diversified immediately with all the other stocks, and you don't trigger any taxes in that. Okay. Big thing to be aware of, big trade-off is it's illiquid for 7 years. All these have trade-offs. And then last one is charitable remainder unit trust, also a CRUT. You transfer shares into this trust. You can diversify immediately without triggering taxes, and then you get a lifetime income stream from that trust. And at the end, it goes to whatever's left goes to charity. These in general are pretty complex, so you really should work with a professional to figure this stuff out. But if you're really concerned about taxes, these are strategies you can look at. All right, so let's talk about next steps here real quick. Again, if you want to talk about your situation, then feel free to put time on my calendar. So I want to take a look here. Before we go into Q&A, quick story about the happy path. So I have a client, startup, about to have their IPO. So we put together a plan. Okay, what are the big goals you want to use these funds for? And they said, we want to buy a house in the Bay Area. We had 2 kids, make sure college is taken care of, and then get to financial independence faster. So IPO happened. We had the selling plan in place. We knew what the goals were. We sold over time. They were able to buy their house, fund their kids' college savings. So those are ready to be paid for. And then they are on track to get to financial independence early. So that is really what it looks like when you do this in the right way. That is the happy path. And that's the opportunity you guys have as SpaceX employees. All right. So I want to take a moment here to see what questions people have. Are there any questions? If so, you want to drop them in the chat. Questions. Okay, so Tom asked, do all these examples apply the same to ex-employees, alumni? Will the lockout be the same? The answer is yes. Typically, lockup period whatever applies to employees will also apply to alumni, including the lockup period. Okay. Okay. So then, thanks for that question, Tom. Eliana, the question is, all right, when you do tax loss harvesting, do you still have to actually buy a fund like from Fidelity or whoever? Okay. So the tax loss harvesting, what you do is and again, you typically work through a professional. For example, if you're buying something, direct indexing that is tracking the S&P 500, you would buy whatever the number, a few hundred individual stocks that track, meaning they're similar to the S&P 500. So yes, you have to actually buy those individual stocks, and then you sell. But when you do this, you're working through a direct indexing provider, and they do all of the actual buying and selling for you. So if the strategy makes sense to you, then you work with a professional or direct indexing provider, and then they execute all of the buying and selling that needs to take place. And then Camillo, to minimize taxes, you mentioned tax loss harvesting, direct indexing, long short direct indexing, exchange funds. So there are four that I was talking about: direct indexing, long short direct indexing, exchange funds, and charitable remainder unit trust, or a CRUT. Okay, those are the four ways you can reduce taxes. And for all of them, you want to understand what the trade-offs are, because there are trade-offs for everything, but depending on your goals, they could make sense. Okay. Okay, any other questions here? And I realize I'll answer one more question. I'm a little it's 11:34, so I want to be sensitive. I'll answer this question. Jordan, what's net investment income tax? I live in California. Heard you have to consider if I sell a lot at once. Oh, yeah. So net investment income tax is, it's also known as a Medicare surcharge. It's 3.8% additional income once you hit certain income thresholds. So likely, yeah, if you sell a lot, instead of paying that 20% cap gains only, they'd add 3.8% on that. So it becomes 23.8%. Okay. And just so you know, in California itself, California does not recognize, does not differentiate between short and long-term cap gains. So they treat it all the same. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope that was helpful. Everybody will get a recording of this by end of day today. And again, if you have questions, put time on my calendar, email me. And if it's helpful, feel free to forward it to your colleagues, since I'm sure there are lots of questions. Thanks everybody for joining.